Hey, I'm Kay. Welcome to Kay's Chit-Chat, where your quiet thoughts become stories and your stories might help someone else feel less alone. People always say, when something is so perfect, you can't find a single thing wrong with it. That's when you should be scared. Ethan never believed that. Until now. He woke up on a Saturday morning, golden sunlight pouring through the bedroom window, and saw Mia sitting on the edge of the bed with her back to him. She was wearing one of his big white shirts, her long brown hair falling over her bare shoulders. Her fingers were moving fast on her phone, really fast, like she was racing against something. Then she turned it off, put it face down on the bed, and looked back at him with that familiar smile. "Did I wake you?" Her voice was soft. Her green eyes were wide and shiny in the sunlight. Ethan shook his head and pulled her into his arms, feeling her warmth against his chest. The smell of jasmine from her shampoo was still on the pillow. "No," he said, his voice still scratchy from sleep. "I just woke up and saw how beautiful you are." Mia laughed a little, her chin resting against his collarbone. The whole room was filled with this gentle, honey-colored light. Birds were singing from the little balcony. Ethan closed his eyes, touched her hair, and thought, "I'm the luckiest guy in the world." They'd lived together for almost 2 years in a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. From the living room window, you could see the maple trees turn bright red in the fall. Ethan was a software engineer, a 9-to-5 job, though sometimes he had to stay up late when a project was due. Mia was a ceramic artist. She had a little studio right there in the apartment. The second bedroom turned into her workspace with a pottery wheel, blocks of gray clay, and dozens of bowls, cups, and little sculptures drying on shelves. The smell of wet clay and glaze had become the smell of home to Ethan. He loved watching her work, the way her long fingers pressed into the shapeless clay, slowly pulling it up into a smooth, curved vase. She worked in silence, sometimes biting her lip, sometimes sighing when a line didn't come out right. When she was done, she'd wash her hands under the faucet, scrubbing the clay from under her nails. Ethan would lean against the doorframe and watch her do that, and his chest would fill with this warm feeling that almost hurt. She was a little shy, not the kind that makes things awkward, but the kind that made her look down when talking to strangers, get flustered when someone complimented her, and hold Ethan's hand tight whenever they walked into a crowded room. He loved that. He loved being the one who protected her, the one she held onto when she was scared. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," he told her once, on a rainy night when they were curled up on the couch, watching some old movie they'd both seen 100 times. Mia didn't answer. She just pressed her cheek against his chest, and Ethan felt her eyelashes flutter faster than usual. He thought she was emotional. He thought his love made her emotional. It never crossed his mind that there might be something else behind those quiet tears. The weird signs started about 3 weeks ago. At first, it was tiny stuff. So small, Ethan told himself he was imagining things. Mia started staying up late. Not like working late. She still sat at her pottery wheel during the day, like always. She stayed up late sitting on the balcony in the dark with a cold cup of tea. The first night Ethan noticed, he woke up at 2 in the morning and felt the empty space next to him. He went out to the balcony and found Mia curled up on the wicker chair, hugging her knees, staring into nothing. "You can't sleep?" he asked. She jumped. Her whole body went stiff for a second, like a deer caught in headlights. Then she relaxed, turned to him, and smiled. But the smile looked a little off, like it didn't quite fit her face. "Yeah, it's just too hot." It was early September, and the nights were cool enough that Ethan had to grab a sweater when he went out. But he didn't say anything. He just sat down next to her, put his arm around her, and felt her body trembling in little waves. It wasn't because she was cold. Then came the phone calls. Mia's phone was usually quiet. She wasn't big on texting or calling. Her friends, Ethan didn't know much about them, checked in sometimes. But most of the time, her pink iPhone sat dark and silent on her work table. But 3 weeks ago, it started ringing. Not once, a lot, at random times of the day, and every time it rang, Mia would flinch. Ethan remembered the first time he saw it. He was in the kitchen making coffee when he heard the ringtone from the studio. It wasn't loud, but he saw Mia freeze at her wheel. Her hands stopped mid-motion. Ethan looked through the doorway. She didn't turn toward the phone, but her shoulders went up, pulling her thin t-shirt tight like she was holding her breath. The first ring ended. Second ring. Third ring. Mia pulled her hands out of the clay, wiped them on her apron, and walked to the phone on the shelf. She picked it up and looked at the screen. Ethan saw her back go straight and stiff. She didn't answer. She let it ring until it stopped, then put it face down on the shelf like she didn't want to look at it anymore. "Who was that?" Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. Mia turned around. Her face looked pale, her lips pressed together so tight they'd lost their color. "Wrong number," she said, her voice rough. "Probably a wrong number." She went back to her wheel, sat down and started working again. But Ethan noticed her hands weren't steady anymore. Her fingers trembled every time they touched the clay, leaving rough edges that she, a potter for 7 years, would never have let happen. He wanted to ask more, but then he thought, maybe she's just tired. Maybe she needs space. And he didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious one, the one who picks apart every little thing his girlfriend does. That's what he told himself. But the phone kept ringing. Every time, Mia would tense up like a guitar string about to snap. Every time she'd try to keep Ethan from hearing, she'd take her phone into the bathroom, turn off the ringer and hide it under her pillow, say, "Must be a network glitch," and give a weird little laugh. Ethan tried not to notice. He tried to focus on work, on the lines of code on his screen, on his video calls with coworkers. But some nights when Mia thought he was asleep, he'd feel her get out of bed. Bare feet quietly padding to the balcony, the sliding door opening. And through the bedroom door, Ethan would see the blue light from her phone glowing on her face, making sharp shadows, making her look like a stranger. She'd sit out there for hours. Sometimes she'd type. Sometimes she'd just stare at the screen with empty eyes. And when she came back to bed, she'd lie there like a log, her breathing steady, but not like someone who was actually asleep. Ethan would lie next to her in the dark, listening to that breathing, and a strange feeling would grow in his chest. Not jealousy, not anger, but this fuzzy sense that something was wrong. Like when you see a tiny crack in a wall that you thought was solid, and you start wondering if it goes deeper than you can see. He didn't ask her. He told himself he would, but then he didn't. Because every morning, Mia woke up with that smile, those eyes, wrapping her arms around his neck and whispering, "I love you." And Ethan convinced himself everything was fine. Everything was fine. Until that Friday night. They'd just finished dinner. Mia made pasta, a recipe she learned from her mom, or from some friend she rarely talked about. Ethan did the dishes, and Mia said she needed to organize her studio. She disappeared into that little room and closed the door. Ethan finished washing up, wiped the counter, and started tidying the living room. He picked up magazines from the coffee table, straightened the pillows on the couch, and accidentally noticed Mia's brown purse sitting on the chair. The purse was open. Not wide open, just unzipped a little, like someone had taken something out and forgotten to close it. Ethan was about to zip it for her when he saw a corner of a white envelope sticking out. It was a regular envelope, but it was thick, really thick. And there was no name on it, no stamp, no writing at all. Just a stack of cash visible through the thin paper at the top. Ethan froze, still holding the purse. He heard footsteps from the studio. Mia was coming out. On instinct, he let go, leaving the purse where it was on the chair. Mia walked into the living room, wiping her clay-stained hands on her apron. She looked at Ethan, smiled, and asked, "You done cleaning up? Want me to make tea?" But before Ethan could answer, her eyes went to the chair, to her open purse. And in that second, Ethan saw something he'd never seen in 2 years. Mia's face went white. Not tired pale, like white as chalk, like all the blood had drained out of her. Her eyes went wide, her pupils shrank. And her hands, those gentle, skillful hands, started shaking uncontrollably. I'm gonna go change," she said, her voice strangled. She hurried toward the bedroom, but Ethan saw she didn't go straight there. She swung by the couch, grabbed the purse, and in one quick movement he almost missed, she pulled the envelope out of the purse and shoved it into the nightstand drawer. Then she closed the drawer. She thought he didn't see, but Ethan saw everything. He stood in the middle of the living room, still holding a throw pillow, and everything got really quiet. The yellow light from the dining table made soft shadows. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, heavy, fast, like it was trying to push something out of his chest. He looked down the hall toward the bedroom where Mia had just disappeared. And for the first time in 2 years, Ethan felt like this apartment wasn't as warm as he'd always thought. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay on his side facing Mia, eyes wide open in the dark. She was right next to him, breathing steady, lips slightly parted, her brown hair spread across the pillow like silk. She was beautiful. She was still as beautiful as the day he'd met her at the arts market, when she sat behind her booth full of pottery and gave him that shy smile when he complimented her work. But now, looking at her, Ethan felt something squeezing his chest. The envelope full of cash. She hid it in the drawer, and she thought he didn't see. He shifted, and the bed creaked a little. Mia stirred but didn't wake up. Ethan checked his watch, 3:15. His body was tired, his eyes stung, but his brain was spinning like a machine that wouldn't shut off. He quietly got out of bed and walked to the living room. It was pitch black except for the streetlight coming through the window, making long streaks on the wood floor. Ethan sat on the couch, put his head in his hands, and stayed like that until the sky started to lighten. Sunday morning, Mia woke up with her usual smile. She made coffee, toasted bread, and sat across from him at the table with those clear eyes. "You're staring," she said, snapping her fingers in front of his face. "What's up?" Ethan blinked. He realized he'd been staring at her without blinking. "Nothing," he said, his voice rough. "Just didn't sleep well." Mia tilted her head, looking worried. She put her hand on his forehead to check for fever. Her palm was cool and soft, and that touch made Ethan want to cry. "No fever," she whispered. "Work stuff?" "Yeah," Ethan said, "just busy." She believed him. She always believed him, and that made Ethan feel like he was sinking into something he couldn't name. After Mia went to her studio to work, Ethan sat down at his computer in the living room. He didn't open his work email. He didn't check the code for his project. His hand moved the mouse, opened the browser, and his fingers, so used to the keyboard, he could type code in the dark, started typing words he couldn't believe he was searching for. Signs your girlfriend is cheating. How to tell if your partner is lying. Unusual behavior in women having an affair. He clicked through links, eyes scanning the articles. His scalp started tingling, that pins and needles feeling creeping from the back of his neck to the top of his head. The signs listed made his heart beat faster with each one. Staying up late alone. Being secretive about phone. Hiding money stuff. Changing daily routines. Ethan pushed his chair back and stood up. He walked to the window, threw it open, and took a deep breath. The cool autumn morning air filled his lungs, but it didn't cool the heat burning in his chest. "No," he said quietly, like he was talking to himself. "That's not it. Mia's not like that." He closed his eyes, trying to hold on to the last 2 years. The mornings she woke up in his arms, the dinners she cooked with clumsy but real love, the rainy nights she pressed her face against his chest and said, "I love you," in a shaky voice like she was about to cry. She loved him. Ethan knew that. He knew it. But he also knew there was an envelope full of cash in her nightstand drawer. He went back to the computer, but this time he searched for something else. GPS tracker for car. Results popped up. There were ones that went under the car, ones that plugged into the OBD port, ones as small as a coin that could hide anywhere. Ethan read through the descriptions, his thumb pressing hard against the edge of the keyboard until the tip of his finger throbbed. He knew what he was doing. He knew he was stepping into a gray area, the kind you don't come back from easily. But he couldn't keep living like this, staying up all night watching her sleep and wondering why, watching her smile at him and wondering if it was real. Hearing her say, "I love you," and wondering if she was saying it to someone else too. "I just want the truth." "The truth," Ethan whispered to the screen, like that made it okay. His finger clicked, "Order." 2 days later, a small gray box arrived at the apartment door. Ethan picked it up, feeling how light it was in his hand, and when he opened it, he heard Mia in the kitchen. "What came in the mail?" she asked, her voice cheerful. "Work stuff," Ethan said, hiding the box behind his back. "Project documents." Mia didn't ask more. She went back to the pot of soup on the stove, and Ethan quickly carried the box into his office, shoving it under a stack of technical books she never touched. That night, when Mia was sound asleep, Ethan went down to the building's parking garage. Mia's silver gray Honda Civic was in its usual spot. Ethan opened the door with the spare key. The click of the lock seemed way too loud in the quiet garage. He looked around, but the garage was empty, just dim fluorescent lights and rows of silent cars. He crouched down, his knee hitting the cold concrete. His hand shook, not from cold, as he attached the tracker under the car, right where he'd watched the YouTube tutorial at least 7 times. His fingers scraped against the metal undercarriage, a sharp edge cutting his skin, leaving a small scratch that stung. He finished, stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans. Walking back to the elevator, Ethan felt sick to his stomach. He leaned against the wall, breathing deep, sweat breaking out on his forehead, even though the garage was cold enough that he could see his own breath. "I just want the truth," he said again. But this time the words sounded weaker, like they were falling apart in his mouth. The next day, Mia said she needed to go buy art supplies. "I have to go to the specialty store," she said, putting her brown purse over her shoulder. "About 15 minutes away. I'll be back soon." Ethan nodded, smiled, and kissed her forehead. "Drive safe." "Okay." She left. Her footsteps echoed down the hall and faded when the elevator door closed. Ethan stood at the living room window, watching the parking lot below. He saw Mia walk out, get in her car, pull out of her spot. The silver gray Civic disappeared around the corner. Ethan pulled out his phone, opened the tracking app. A small blue dot appeared on the map, moving slowly through familiar streets. Ethan stared at the screen, his thumb squeezing the edge of the phone so hard his knuckles went white. The feeling in his chest was weird, relief because he knew where she was, and disgusted himself for doing this. "I just want the truth." The blue dot moved through a few streets, then turned onto a main road. Ethan recognized the direction. It was heading toward the craft store she usually went to. He exhaled a long, heavy breath like he'd been holding it all this time. Then the dot suddenly turned off the main road. Ethan squinted. He zoomed in, watching every turn. The blue dot went through a neighborhood, then a small shopping area, and finally stopped at a location about 20 miles from home. Ethan checked the address. Sunrise Cafe, not the craft store. Ethan froze. His hands started shaking. Not the little trembles from before, but deep shaking that started in his spine and went down his arms, making the phone rattle in his hand like a leaf. He stared at the little blue dot on the screen. It wasn't moving. "She's at a cafe. She said she was going to the craft store." She lied. Ethan dropped onto the couch, the cushions letting out a groan like something being crushed. His mind spun, thoughts tangling together. Maybe she just stopped for coffee first. Maybe she's meeting a friend. Maybe there's a reason. But all of it got buried under something darker, heavier, rising up from his gut, spreading through his muscles, making his teeth clench so hard his jaw ached. He didn't know who she was meeting. He didn't know what she was doing. But he knew one thing, with a certainty that made him want to punch the wall. She lied. Ethan sat on the couch, eyes glued to his phone, waiting. His body was stiff, his back straight, his hands clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. 15 minutes passed. 30. 50. The blue dot was still at Sunrise Cafe. And all that time, Ethan never took his eyes off the screen. Not once. Ethan didn't remember grabbing his keys. The next thing he knew, he was behind the wheel, the engine running, and the map on his phone was giving directions to Sunrise Cafe. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white, bulging like stones under the skin. His jaw was locked, teeth grinding together so hard it sent pain up into his cheekbones. But he couldn't relax. He had to go there. He had to see for himself. The 20-mile drive was like a blur. Ethan didn't remember which intersections he turned at, how many gas stations he passed. He just remembered his foot pressing down on the gas, his body pressed back against the seat, and a voice in his head repeating, "She's there with someone. She lied, she lied." When he pulled into the Sunrise Cafe parking lot, his heart was pounding so hard he could hear blood rushing in his ears. He parked in a corner about 50 yards from the entrance, far enough not to be seen, close enough to see clearly. His windows were tinted. Ethan sat still, eyes narrowed toward the cafe. And then he saw her. Mia was sitting at an outdoor table under a green umbrella. She was wearing the cream-colored sweater he liked, her hair tied up. But something was wrong. She wasn't sitting straight. She was curled in on herself, shoulders hunched forward, both hands wrapped around a paper cup like it was the only thing keeping her together. And across from her was a man. Ethan had never seen him before. He was tall, lean but solid-looking, wearing an old black leather jacket. His dark hair was short, his face sharp with a hooked nose and thin lips curled into a smile. Not a friendly smile, the smile of someone who had the upper hand. Ethan felt the blood freeze in his veins. Mia was crying. He could tell even from a distance. She wiped her face with her hand, but tears kept coming. Her shoulders shook in waves, and her lips were moving. She was talking, pleading. Ethan saw her lean forward, hands clasped like she was praying, and a choked sob escaped loud enough for him to hear through the car window. She's begging him. The man across from her didn't flinch. He took a sip of coffee, set the cup down, and smirked. Ethan clearly saw that smirk. Cold, contemptuous. He said something, and Mia curled up even more, squeezing her paper cup so hard it crumpled, the lid popping off, brown liquid spilling across the table. But she didn't notice. She just stared at him with red, swollen eyes full of fear. The man stood up. Ethan saw Mia's body go rigid. Her hands let go of the cup and gripped the edge of the table. She looked up at him, and in that moment, Ethan saw her face clearly, pale, ghostly, her lips drained of color. The man leaned down and put his hand on Mia's shoulder. It looked like a comforting gesture, but Ethan saw the way Mia flinched when his hand touched her. She went stiff like a statue, her shoulders lifting, her whole body tensing like she'd been shocked. The man said a few more words, smirked again. That smirk made Ethan want to smash his window, and walked away. Mia sat alone. She didn't move for the next 5 minutes. Ethan sat in his car, hands still gripping the wheel, watching her sit there, dazed, at the table covered in spilled coffee. Wind blew through her hair, but she didn't push it back. She just sat still, staring at nothing, her shoulders still shaking. Ethan slowly raised his phone. His thumb opened the camera. The image appeared on screen. Mia sitting alone under the green umbrella, coffee spreading across the table. Her face blurring as tears suddenly blurred his vision. He took a picture. A fake click sound, then another picture, then another. He looked at the photos he'd just taken. Evidence. In Ethan's head, the pieces finally clicked together. The envelope of cash, the secret phone calls, the sleepless nights on the balcony. And now this. Her sitting with a strange man, crying, begging, letting him touch her, letting him smirk at her. An affair. The word echoed in Ethan's head like an alarm. It got louder and louder until it filled every corner of his mind, pushing everything else out. He didn't see her trembling anymore. He didn't see her tears. He didn't see the way she flinched when the man touched her shoulder. All he saw now was a woman who had betrayed him, crying because she got caught, begging her lover. A sharp pain hit him suddenly. Not in his chest, but in his gut. A cramp so strong Ethan doubled over, his forehead hitting the steering wheel. He gasped, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead, soaking the skin touching the leather wheel. The smell of the car, the jasmine scent still on the passenger seat, Mia's perfume, filled his nose and made him want to throw up. He sat up, wiped the sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand, looked back at the cafe. Mia was standing up. She was gathering her things, each movement slow and heavy, like she was moving through water. She wiped up the spilled coffee, put the crumpled cup on the tray, and walked toward her car on unsteady legs. Ethan watched until her silver gray Civic pulled out of the lot. He didn't go home right away. He sat in his car a little longer, hands still gripping the wheel, staring at nothing. In his head, a plan was forming, step by step, clear and cold. Go home, wait for her, confront her, show her the evidence, end it. He wouldn't yell, he wouldn't break things, he'd be calm, show her the pictures, and tell her, we're done. Thinking about that, Ethan felt a different kind of pain, sharper, deeper, stab into his chest. Not because she'd betrayed him, but because he realized in that moment. He couldn't remember the last time she'd really smiled at him. But he pushed that thought away. He couldn't be weak now. He'd been lied to. He had a right to be angry. He had a right to end it. The drive home felt longer than before. Ethan drove slow, not wanting to press the gas like he had on the way there. His hands on the wheel were still tight, but now his fingers were numb from holding the same position too long. He stretched them one by one, hearing his knuckles crack, and realized his palms were sweaty, cold and wet. When he pulled into the garage, he saw Mia's silver gray Civic in its usual spot. She was home. He turned off the engine, sat for a few seconds, took a deep breath. The air in the car felt thick, smelling like leather and hot plastic. He opened the door, got out, and closed it with just enough force. Not hard enough to make noise, but hard enough to feel the weight of the door as it shut. The elevator took him up to the 7th floor. Ethan looked in the elevator mirror and saw his own face. Pale, dark circles under his eyes. Lips pressed so tight the corners of his mouth were pulled down. He looked like a stranger, but he didn't care anymore. The apartment opened in front of him, yellow light coming from the living room. Ethan stepped in, put his keys on the shelf, and heard a small sound from the couch. Mia was sitting there. She was curled up on the couch, knees to her chest, arms wrapped around them. She'd changed clothes. No more cream sweater, just an old gray t-shirt that was too big. Her hair was down, covering half her face. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the coffee table where 2 cups of water sat, one for him, one for her, and a white envelope. The envelope of cash. Ethan stopped at the door, his hand still in his pocket where his phone was, where the photos were. He felt the weight of it, not actual weight, but something invisible pressing on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Mia looked up. Her face was blank, not tired blank like someone who'd cried so much there were no tears left. Her eyes were swollen and red, dark circles under them like bruises. Her lips were chapped, peeling. She looked at Ethan, and in her eyes was something that made him want to look away. Fear and pleading and desperation all mixed together. Her lips moved. I need to tell you something. Her voice was rough, like her throat had been scraped raw, her hands hugging her knees squeezed tighter, fingers digging into her skin through her pants. Ethan didn't step in. He stood in the doorway, 1 foot in the living room, 1 foot still in the hall, like his body was being pulled in 2 directions. His hand in his pocket squeezed the phone. In his head, 2 voices were screaming. One said, show her the photos, expose her, end it. The other, quieter but impossible to ignore, whispered, look at her. She's hurting, she's scared. Something else is going on here. Ethan didn't move. Mia kept looking at him, her eyes fixed, like she was afraid that if she blinked, he'd disappear. Her fingers dug into her knees, nails leaving red marks on her pale skin. I know you saw it, she said, her voice breaking. The envelope, I know you saw it. She pointed to the envelope on the table. Ethan didn't answer. He just stood there, feeling his heart pound in his chest, feeling cold sweat run down his spine, feeling his phone burning hot in his pocket like a piece of metal pulled from a fire. Mia took a deep breath. Her shoulders went up, then down in a long shudder. I'll tell you, she whispered. I'll tell you everything. And in that moment, Ethan didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't know if he'd pull out his phone or walk into the room or turn around and leave. All he knew was that in his chest, what was pounding hardest wasn't his heart. It was fear of what was about to be said, and fear that after he heard it, he wouldn't recognize his own life anymore. Mia looked at Ethan standing in the doorway, and something inside her broke. She'd imagined this moment 100 times. Every time was different. Sometimes she thought she'd be calm, sometimes she thought she'd cry, sometimes she thought she wouldn't be able to say anything at all. But she never imagined Ethan standing so far away from her, like there was invisible glass between them, and she was looking at him from the other side of a world she didn't belong to anymore. His eyes. She'd never seen his eyes so cold. I know you saw it, she said, and her voice cracked right from the first word. Her throat was dry, her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. She pointed toward the envelope on the coffee table, her arm shaking so much her finger pointed at the empty space next to it. The envelope, I know you saw it. Ethan still didn't say anything. He stood there like a statue, his hand still in his pocket, and Mia could see his jaw clenched tight, the muscles in his neck pulled like tight ropes. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to press her face against his chest and cry until she couldn't breathe anymore. But she knew she didn't have that right. Not now, maybe never again. She took a deep breath. Her lungs expanded, her ribs stretched, and she felt each vertebra in her back crack as she sat up straighter. It was time. She couldn't hide anymore. I'll tell you, she whispered. I'll tell you everything. She saw Ethan tilt his head slightly. His lips moved like he was about to say something. Mia knew what it was. She could read it in his eyes. He thought she was about to confess to cheating. He thought the secret phone calls, the sleepless nights, the envelope of cash, all of it was evidence of a woman having an affair. She saw him about to say, "Well, I already know." But she didn't let him. "I've been to prison," she said. Her voice echoed in the quiet living room. And those words she'd never said to anyone since the day she got out, fell like stones, heavy, changing everything around them. Ethan froze. His eyes opened a little wider, but not from surprise, because he was trying to understand. His shoulders were still tight, but there was a small shift in how he stood, like his weight just moved from one foot to the other. Mia looked down at her hands. She was gripping her knees, her fingers white from squeezing. She let them relax slowly and saw the red marks on her skin. Marks of fear. "I grew up in a small town," she began, her voice getting softer but still loud enough for Ethan to hear. "My mom died when I was 12. My dad, he didn't know how to be a father. He drank, and when he drank, he got violent. I learned to be quiet. I learned to make myself small so no one would see me." She stopped and swallowed hard. Her throat burned like these words were scraping their way out. "In school, there was a boy. His name was Daniel. He bullied me for 3 years. Every day I was scared to go to school, scared to see him in the hallway, scared to hear him laugh. He made me feel like I was nothing, like I didn't deserve to exist." Her voice started shaking. Her eyes got hot, and she felt tears gathering at the corners, but she didn't wipe them. Let them fall, let them flow. "One day when I was 17, he pushed me down the stairs. I fell. I was fine, just bruised. But that day, something inside me broke. I couldn't take it anymore." She closed her eyes. Her breathing got heavy, each breath making her chest tighten. "I had a small knife in my backpack. I don't know why. I wanted him to be scared. I wanted him to know that I could hurt someone too, the way he hurt me. I just wanted him to stop." Tears ran down her face, hot drops falling onto her chin, onto her clenched hands. She didn't wipe them. She didn't hide them. But when I pulled out the knife, he came at me, and in that crazy moment, I stabbed him. Silence. The room was so quiet, Mia could hear the clock on the wall. Tick-tock. Slow, like time was stretching itself out on purpose to torture her. "He died on the way to the hospital," she said. And her voice wasn't the voice of someone telling a story anymore. It was the voice of a 17-year-old girl trapped inside a 27-year-old woman's body who never got out. "I killed him. I took someone's life." She opened her eyes. Ethan was still standing in the doorway. But now he'd stepped into the living room. Not a full step, just a small one, but enough for Mia to see his body change. His shoulders weren't as tight as before. His hands had come out of his pockets, hanging at his sides. And his face wasn't cold anymore, and it was stunned. 10 years, Mia said, her lips trembling. "I was in prison for 10 years. 10 years in a room smaller than my studio now. 10 years staring at the ceiling, wondering if I hadn't brought the knife that day, if I'd just run, if I just... She couldn't finish. A sob burst out of her throat, and she wrapped her arms around herself, hugging her stomach like she was afraid that if she didn't hold on tight, she'd fall apart. "I tried," she said between gasps. "In prison, I learned pottery. There was an art program. I made thousands of bowls, thousands of cups. And every time my hands worked the clay, I told myself, I could become a better person. I could live to make up for it." She looked up at Ethan. Her eyes were red and swollen, tears still flowing, but she wasn't shaking anymore. Her body had stopped trembling, and now all that was left was a cold emptiness. "When I got out, I came to the city. I started over, and I made pottery, sold it at the arts market, and then I met you." She looked at Ethan, and in her eyes now was something different. Not tears, but a small, fragile hope, so delicate that one strong breath could blow it out. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Ethan. When I'm with you, I feel like I deserve to exist. Like those years aren't all that I am. Like I can be happy." She stopped, wiping tears with the back of her hand. Her skin was wet, her fingers cold. "But then 3 weeks ago, he showed up." Her voice changed. It wasn't the voice of a sad storyteller anymore. It was the voice of someone trying to hold back something darker, heavier. Julian, Daniel's older brother, he found me. He knew everything, my past, my real name, where I lived. He came to my studio and he smiled. She hugged her arms tighter and Ethan could see her fingers digging into her skin, leaving red marks. He said if I didn't pay him, he'd come to you. He'd tell you who I really was and who I used to be. And he smiled, Ethan. He smiled at me, looking at me like I was garbage. Mia took a deep breath. Her lungs burned, and in her chest, her heart was pounding like a trapped bird. I paid him $2,000, all the money I'd saved from selling pottery. I gave it to him in an envelope, just like the one you saw, and I thought that was it. She closed her eyes. Her lashes were wet, stuck together in little clumps. But yesterday he came back. He wanted more. He said that this was just the beginning, that I'd have to pay him until he decided it was enough, that if I didn't pay, he'd ruin my life, he'd ruin yours. She opened her eyes, and this time, she looked straight at Ethan. Her eyes, always shy, always avoiding, were now looking at him with a painful honesty. I don't have any money left, Ethan. I have nothing left to pay him. And I don't want to lose you. Her voice broke one last time, and she didn't try to hold it back. She cried like a child, long choked sobs coming from deep in her throat. She doubled over, hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking in waves of pain that had been trapped for 3 weeks, for 10 years, for a whole lifetime. In the small living room, there was only her crying and the steady tick-tock of the clock on the wall. Mia couldn't see where Ethan was. All she knew is that in the darkness behind her hands, she heard a sound. Not footsteps, but something hitting the floor. Ethan's phone fell from his hand, hit the wood floor, and slid somewhere under the couch. Then she heard footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps, like the person walking was carrying some invisible weight. And then she felt warmth. Ethan sat down next to her on the couch. She felt his weight sink into the cushions, felt the heat from his arm as he put it around her shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his chest, and Mia, she didn't know if she was crying or laughing or what, pressed her face against him, where his heart was beating faster than normal, but steady, like a life raft in the middle of the ocean. She didn't know what he'd do next. She didn't know if he'd stay or go, if he'd believe her or not, if he could forgive her lies. But in this moment, in this hug so tight, she could feel every one of his ribs pressing against her. She felt, for the first time in 10 years, like she wasn't alone anymore. Ethan sat on the couch, still holding Mia tight, but his mind was spinning. She was still crying in his arms, those choked sobs, those tremors passing from her body to his arm, letting him feel every quick breath she took. Her hair was loose on his chest, and the smell of jasmine from her shampoo was still there like always. But everything was different. Nothing was like always anymore. In his head, images kept coming back. The man at the cafe, the black leather jacket, the smirk, the hand on Mia's shoulder, and how she flinched when he touched her. Ethan closed his eyes, and what came to mind wasn't the stranger anymore, it was himself. He saw himself sitting at his computer, searching for signs of cheating. He saw himself holding the small gray box, hiding it under the books. He saw himself crouched under Mia's car, attaching the tracker to the cold metal frame, his finger getting cut on the sharp edge. Heat rushed from his neck to his face, so hot he thought his skin was burning. Not from anger, from shame, a deep shame that went all the way to his bones, making him want to curl up, disappear, turn back time, and not do any of it. She wasn't cheating on him. She was being threatened. She was scared. And him, what did he do? He tightened his arms around Mia, like he could make up for it, like this hug could erase what he'd done. But the tighter he held, the more he felt how small she was. Her shoulder blades sticking out under her shirt, her spine showing through the thin fabric, her thin shoulders shaking. She carried this alone. 3 weeks. 3 weeks she stayed up, scared, crying alone on the balcony. And him, he sat in the living room, Googling signs of cheating. Shame gave way to something else. It started in his chest, a small hot spot, smoldering like embers buried in ash. Then it spread faster, stronger, bursting into flame when the image of the man at the cafe came back. That guy, he did this, he scared her, he took her money. He put his hand on her shoulder and smiled while she cried. Ethan clenched his jaw so hard he heard his teeth grind. The muscles in his arms tightened, and he felt his nails dig into his palms, not because he was making a fist, but because he was trying not to break something. Who is he? That question echoed in his head like a siren. And with it came a cold focus. The same focus he had when facing complex problems at work, sitting for hours in front of a screen finding bugs in thousands of lines of code. But this time it wasn't code. This time it was people. The woman crying in his arms. Mia was still crying. Her sobs weren't the choked ones anymore. They'd become something deeper, more raw. She cried like she'd been holding it in for 10 years, and now the dam had broken. Water rushing out with no stopping it. Each sob that came from her throat made her whole body contract, and Ethan felt each wave through his chest like he was crying too. He didn't say anything. He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" sounded small and useless. Promises sounded empty, so he just held her, letting his body do the only thing it could, be a wall, a roof, a place for her to lean on until the storm passed. His hand rubbed her back, long, slow strokes. He felt each vertebra under his fingers, how cold her skin was, even though she was crying hot tears. He pulled the blanket from the couch over her shoulders, and she buried her face deeper into his chest, like she wanted to crawl inside and hide from the world. Then slowly her crying got quieter. Not because she was out of tears. Ethan knew that. She'd never run out of tears. But because she'd cried so much, she didn't have the strength left. Her body got heavy in his arms like all the tension, fear, despair had drained out of her, leaving a weak, fragile shell. Ethan pressed his cheek to the top of her head. Her hair was wet with sweat and tears, but he didn't let go. He just held her, letting his warmth wrap around her, slowly, slowly, like the warm breath of spring melting thin ice on a lake. "I'll handle this." He whispered it, but his voice didn't shake. It was low, steady, solid, a reassurance, but also a promise. Mia looked up at him. Her eyes were swollen, red, her lips cracked and peeling. She looked at him with something Ethan had never seen in her before. Not shyness, not hesitation, but confusion, like she wasn't sure if she was dreaming. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice so hoarse it was barely there. "I should have told you sooner. I should have..." "Shh," Ethan said, putting his finger to her lips. He felt her hot, shaky breath on his fingertip. "Not your fault." He knew he meant it, and he knew it was true. But deep down, he also knew he was talking to himself. That what he'd done, the suspicion, the tracker, the photos, all of it was his fault. And he'd have to live with that. But not now. Now she was what mattered. Mia nodded weakly, then pressed her face against his chest again. She wasn't crying anymore, but her shoulders still shook in little waves, like a leaf after rain, still trembling from leftover drops. They sat like that in silence. Ethan didn't know how long, 10 minutes, 20, an hour. He only knew that his body was getting stiff from sitting so long in one position, but he didn't dare move, afraid any small motion would wake her from this fragile quiet. Finally, Mia's breathing got steadier. She wasn't asleep, Ethan knew, because sometimes her fingers still gripped his shirt, but she'd calmed down. Her body stopped shaking and warmth was starting to come back. Ethan slowly sat her up against the couch, gently, like handling something breakable. Mia didn't resist. She just looked at him with tired eyes, but there was a small light in them. Hope, maybe, or at least curiosity about what he was about to do. He stood up. His legs were numb, and he felt pins and needles in his feet as blood started flowing again. He walked around the coffee table, bent down, and reached under the couch. His fingers touched the phone. It was face down on the floor, and when he picked it up, the screen was still on, still showing the tracking app, still showing the little blue dot at Sunrise Cafe. Ethan closed that app, pressing harder than he needed to, like he could erase what he'd done by deleting the app. He opened the photo gallery. The pictures he'd taken at the cafe came up, one by one, clear and sharp. Mia sitting under the green umbrella, coffee spilled on the table, and the man across from her. Ethan zoomed in on the last photo, the one where Julian's face was clearest, the sharp features, the hooked nose, the thin lips curled in a smile. Ethan stared at that face, and in his chest the flame burst up again, but this time he controlled it. He didn't let it burn him. He held it back, pushed it down, turned it into something else. Focus. He sat down across from Mia, phone in hand. Julian, he said, and the name tasted bitter coming out of his mouth. This is him? He held the phone toward Mia. She looked at the screen and Ethan saw her body go stiff. Her eyes widened, her pupils shrank, and her hands grabbed the edge of the couch. She nodded, a small nod, but enough for Ethan to know. "Who is he?" he asked, mumbling. But the question wasn't for Mia. It was for himself. Who is he? He looked at the face on the screen again. The face of the man who'd scared Mia, who'd taken her money, who'd put his hand on her shoulder and smiled while she cried. Ethan didn't know who Julian was. He didn't know what he did for a living, where he lived, and how many times he'd been arrested. He didn't know how strong he was, if he had friends helping him, what he was willing to do to get what he wanted. But he knew one thing. He'd find out. Ethan's thumb moved on the screen, saving the photo to a separate folder. His eyes didn't leave Julian's face, and in his head, 100 questions were forming, but also 100 answers, step by step, like solving the hardest coding problem he'd ever faced. He looked up at Mia. She was still looking at him, her eyes still scared, but now there was something else, a small amazement, like she hadn't expected him to be this calm. Ethan put his phone on the table, stood up, and walked over to her. He sat down next to her, put his arm around her, and pulled her into his chest again. "I'll handle this," he said again, louder this time, clearer. "I promise." Mia didn't say anything. She just pressed her face into his shoulder, and in the darkness of the living room, Ethan felt new tears. But this time, she wasn't shaking. The computer screen lit up the small office, cold blue light shining on Ethan's face, making the sharp lines stand out. Outside the window, the city was asleep, just a few yellow lights glowing in the night. But Ethan wasn't sleeping. He couldn't. Not now. Mia was lying on the couch in the living room. She'd fallen asleep after crying herself out. Ethan had put a blanket over her, left a glass of water on the table, kissed her forehead, and quietly gone into the office. She needed rest, and he needed to find out who Julian was. He sat at the desk, hands on the keyboard, and started typing. Being a software engineer wasn't just about writing code. Ethan knew how to search, how to dig through layers of data most people didn't know existed. He started with what Mia had told him. Daniel, the case from years ago, the death 10 years back. He searched local news sites from the small town where Mia grew up, old articles, stories buried under thousands of newer posts. His eyes narrowed when he saw the headline. Chandra's 17-year-old boy dies after accident at school. Accident. That's what they called it. Ethan read the article, eyes moving fast through the words, feeling the muscles in his shoulders tighten with each sentence. The article named the victim, Daniel Moreau, and the person responsible, identified only as M.A. because she was a minor. Ethan didn't need to read the full name. He knew it was Mia. Then he searched for Julian Moreau. His fingers moved on the keyboard, one key at a time, slow and exact. He searched public databases, social media, forums where people with criminal records showed up in local news articles, and he found him. Julian Moreau, 34 years old, Daniel's older brother, 2 priors, one for small-time fraud 6 years ago, one for extortion 3 years ago. Both got him probation. Ethan read every line of the records, and in his chest, the flame came back. Not the quick flame from before, a slow, cold flame, burning deep inside, letting him see everything clearly. A predator, a bully. He's done this before. Ethan leaned back in his chair, head against the rest, eyes on the ceiling. The muscles in his neck were tight, and he felt a dull ache running from his neck to his shoulders. The ache of sitting too long, too tense, in front of a screen. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his lids, Julian's face appeared clearer than ever. He's done this to other people, and he'll keep doing it if nobody stops him. Ethan opened his eyes. He sat up straight, and in his head, a plan started to form. The next morning, Mia woke up with her eyes still swollen. She sat on the couch, holding a cup of warm water, looking at Ethan with eyes that were both scared and curious as he sat down across from her. "I found out who he is," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "Julian Moreau, Daniel's brother. He's got a record for fraud and extortion." Mia flinched. Ethan saw it. A small shiver ran down her spine, making her big shirt rustle. Her hands squeezed the cup so hard Ethan was afraid it would break. "I know," she whispered. "I looked him up when he first contacted me, but I didn't know what to do. I was scared. Scared that if I went to the police, Everyone would find out. You would find out. She looked up at Ethan, and in her eyes was a pain Ethan had never seen in anyone. The pain of someone who'd lived with a secret so long it had become part of them. And taking it off was like cutting off skin. "I didn't want to lose you," she said again, her voice shaking. Ethan moved to sit next to her. He put his hand on hers. Cold hands, thin fingers squeezing the cup. He gently pried her fingers off, set the cup on the table, and held her hands in his. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and he knew it was true. He knew it in his bones, in every heartbeat, in the way his body leaned toward her like a sunflower turning toward the sun. "But we need to deal with this, once and for all." Mia looked at him, eyes wide. "How? I don't have any money, and if I don't pay..." "I'm not paying him," Ethan said, and his voice got colder. Not cold toward her, but cold toward the man out there. The man who thought he could threaten the woman Ethan loved. "I'm not going to use violence either. That's not who I am, and I don't want you to see that." He paused, took a deep breath. His lungs expanded, and he felt his chest rise and fall like a machine starting up. "I'm going to meet him." Mia grabbed his hands. Ethan felt surprising strength in those small hands, the strength of fear. No, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "You don't know him. He's dangerous. He could..." "You think I'm going to go there, like some idiot, and let him threaten me?" Ethan asked, the corner of his mouth lifting. Not a smile, but a cold confidence he didn't know he had. "I'm a software engineer, Mia, and my job is finding holes in systems and patching them. He's got holes, and I'll find them." He explained his plan to her, step by step. His voice was low, steady, clear, like he was presenting a project to the board. But this time, the project was their lives. He'd pretend to be a rich guy, a protector Mia had hired to negotiate. He'd meet Julian, offer a deal, a big amount of money to end things for good. But during the meeting, he'd record everything, every threat, every extortion demand. He'd have evidence. And with that evidence, Julian wouldn't be a threat anymore. "He's got a record already," Ethan said, his eyes cold. "Once we have evidence, he won't dare touch you. Real prison time will finish him." Mia sat quietly, still holding Ethan's hands. He felt her fingers shaking, but she didn't pull away. She looked at him, and in her eyes now wasn't just fear. There was something else, a small but steady light of hope. "But if he finds out you're recording?" she asked, whispering. He won't," Ethan said. And he said it with a certainty he didn't know where it came from. Maybe from the anger he'd held down, maybe from the love burning in his chest, maybe from the shame of doubting her. A shame he would turn into action. "I won't let anything happen, I promise." Mia looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, a small nod, but full of determination. They sat together on the couch, Mia's phone on the table in front of them. Ethan had written the message, and now he handed the phone to Mia so she could read it. "And I want to meet. Someone wants to talk to you about our arrangement. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., the cafe on Maple Street. Don't be late." Mia read each word, her lips pressed tight. Ethan saw her fingers shaking as she held the phone, and he put his hand over hers. His fingers warmer, steadier. "Anything you want to change?" he asked. Mia shook her head. She looked at Ethan, and in that moment, Ethan saw a strength in her he'd never seen before. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, like clay after it's been fired, harder and tougher than anyone would guess. "Send it," she said. Ethan pressed send, a soft whoosh sound, and the message disappeared from the screen, flying through space toward the man who didn't know what was coming for him. They sat in silence, waiting. Ethan felt his heartbeat in his chest, each beat clear and slow. He wasn't nervous, he was focused. His mind went through every detail of the plan, every possible situation, every response. This was what he was best at: finding holes, patching them, building a system that couldn't be broken. 3 minutes later, the phone buzzed. They both looked at the screen. Ethan felt Mia's body stiffen next to him, her breath stopping for a moment. A message from an unknown number. "Fine, but don't play games. If you want this over, bring cash. 5,000. No negotiation." Ethan read the message, and slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not a happy smile. The smile of someone who just watched his enemy walk into a trap. He turned to Mia. She was looking at him, eyes still scared, but her shoulders weren't shaking anymore. This time, Ethan said, his voice low, cold, and determined, "I'll be the one smirking." He took Mia's hand and squeezed. Her hand was small in his, but she squeezed back. And through that squeeze, Ethan felt something. She trusted him. After everything, after the lies, after the doubt, after the nights she cried alone on the balcony, she still trusted him. And Ethan wasn't going to let that trust be betrayed. He picked up the phone and saved Julian's message. That was the first piece of evidence. And tomorrow he'd have more. Outside the window, morning light was starting to creep through the buildings, painting the gray sky pink. A new day was beginning. And Ethan knew that after tomorrow, everything would change. Maybe better, maybe worse, but never the same again. He wasn't scared. He'd been scared enough, doubted enough, sat still and watched the woman he loved cry alone on the balcony enough. Tomorrow he'd face the man who'd caused all of this, and this time he wouldn't back down. The cafe on Maple Street was empty at this hour. Ethan sat at a table by the window, his back to the wall, a cup of coffee in front of him that had gone cold a long time ago. He wasn't drinking, he just sat, hands on the table, waiting. Inside his jacket pocket, his phone was recording. He'd checked 3 times before leaving the house. Each time his finger pressed the record button, watching the time counter tick up, feeling his heart speed up. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like his tech skills weren't for work. They were for survival. Not his survival, Mia's. The cafe door opened, letting in a blast of cold air. Ethan didn't need to turn around. He knew it was him. He felt the change in the room, the way people near the door shifted, the way the air got heavier, like darkness had just walked in under the warm yellow lights. Julian sat down across from Ethan without waiting for an invitation. He looked exactly like his photo, but more real, more scary. His eyes were dark, narrowed as he looked at Ethan, and his thin lips curled in the same smirk Ethan had seen from far away at the cafe last time, the smirk of someone who thought he was on top of the world. "The new protector, huh?" Julian said, his voice deep and mocking. He waved at a waitress without looking at her. "Guess she found someone richer." "Good. I like rich people." Ethan didn't say anything. He let Julian talk, let him show off, let him show who he really was. The waitress came. Julian ordered espresso, and when she walked away, he turned all his attention to Ethan. His eyes moved up and down, sizing him up. $20,000, Julian said, his voice flat, like he was reading a price tag at the grocery store. "That's the price for my silence. I won't bother her again. I'll disappear. She can go back to pretending she's clean." He paused, took a sip of his coffee, and smiled. "Or," he said, setting the cup down with a small clink, "I'll post the story on social media. I know people in journalism, they'd pay for this. A killer pretending to be an artist, living quietly after 10 years in prison. People would eat it up." Julian leaned back in his chair, arms spread wide, like a king on his throne. "I gave her a chance. 20,000 is cheap for a new life, my friend." Ethan felt every muscle in his body tighten. His hands under the table clenched so hard his nails dug into his palms, leaving red marks. But his face stayed calm. He'd prepared for this. He knew Julian would raise the price, threaten, smirk. He knew all of it. And he also knew that in his pocket, his phone was recording every word. Ethan slowly reached into his jacket pocket. Julian watched the movement, and Ethan saw his body tense slightly. A small reaction, but Ethan noticed. His eyes narrowed, and his hand on the table curled slightly, ready for anything. But Ethan didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out his phone, set it on the table, and opened a saved audio file. "You want to hear something?" Ethan asked, his voice flat and calm. Julian looked at the phone, then at Ethan. The smirk was still there, but starting to freeze. Ethan pressed play. Audio came from the phone's speaker, filling the quiet cafe. It was Julian's voice. Clear, unmistakable. "You think you can hide? You killed my brother, you did 10 years, and now you think you deserve a new life? I'm not letting you go. You're going to pay me, month after month, until I say it's enough. If you don't pay, I'll put this story online. Everyone will know. Your boyfriend will know. You'll lose everything." Yeah. Ethan watched Julian as the recording played. He saw the changes in his face. Every muscle, every line like a photo developing in a darkroom. The smirk was the first to go, followed by the tightening of his jaw. His eyes opened wider, his pupils shrank. His skin color changed, from normal to gray like ash. The recording ended. Silence. Ethan put his phone back in his pocket, Not the outside pocket, but the inside one where nobody could grab it. He looked straight at Julian, and for the first time in this meeting, he let his real feelings show on his face. Not anger, not triumph. A smile, a cold, mocking smile, just like the one Julian had given Mia at the cafe last time. "Who do you think a judge will believe when I give this to the police, Julian?" Ethan asked, his voice soft like he was asking about the weather. Julian sat still. His body was frozen, his hands on the table, not curled anymore. They were flat, but not in a threatening way. Like someone who just got punched and hadn't figured out what happened. "You've got a record already," Ethan continued, his voice still steady. "Fraud, extortion, 2 probations. Third time you think they'll let you go? You'll do real time, not 10 years like what your brother caused, but enough to end your life." Julian blinked. Once, twice. His lips moved, but nothing came out. Ethan could see his chest rising and falling fast, his breathing quick and shallow. Sweat started forming on his forehead. Tiny drops that sparkled under the cafe's yellow lights like little beads of fear. "Here's the deal," Ethan said, sitting up straighter, hands on the table, eyes locked on Julian. "You disappear. You never contact me again. You don't come near her. Don't call, don't text, don't hire anyone to follow her. If you do anything that scares her, this goes to the police within 10 minutes. He pointed to his inside pocket, where the phone was. "And if you think you can take it from me," Ethan said, his voice dropping lower, "you should know there are copies. Lots of copies. Saved in the cloud, sent to a friend's email, in an envelope, with the police station address already on it. If I disappear, it still gets where it needs to go." Ethan didn't have a friend holding copies. He didn't have any envelope ready. But Julian didn't need to know that. Julian sat in silence for so long Ethan could hear the espresso machine at the counter, a spoon stirring sugar in someone's cup 3 tables away, traffic outside. All the sounds of a normal world happening around 2 men sitting on the thin line between justice and violence. Then Julian stood up. His chair scraped the floor with a sharp screech. He stood there, taller than Ethan sitting down, but Ethan didn't feel threatened. He saw Julian's hands shaking, small tremors, but there. Julian's face was gray. Not cold gray, but the gray of someone holding back rage. Someone whose mask had been ripped off and didn't know where to hide. He raised his hand, finger pointing at Ethan's face. His fingertip was less than a foot away, and Ethan could feel heat coming off his shaking hand. "You'll regret this," Julian growled, each word forced out of his throat. "She's a killer. She killed my brother. You think you can protect her forever? People will find out. I'll make sure that they find out. You and her, you'll regret this." He spun around and walked fast to the door. His hand shoved it open so hard it bounced off the frame with a loud bang, making nearby customers turn and stare. Julian disappeared outside, his black leather jacket flashing past the glass door like a ghost fading into bright sunlight. Ethan sat there, not moving. He felt his heart beating in his chest, slow, heavy beats, like drums after a battle. His palms were soaked with sweat, and he realized that during the whole meeting, he hadn't taken a single deep breath. He reached into his inside pocket, took out his phone, and looked at the screen. The recording was still going, 47 minutes. Ethan pressed stop, and a message appeared. Audio file saved. He closed his eyes, leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in hours, let his body relax. His shoulders dropped, the muscles in his back loosened, and he felt each vertebra settle back into place after being squeezed tight for so long. He opened his eyes and looked out the window. Outside, the sun was still shining, cars still driving, life still going. But in his hand, he had something that could protect Mia, could end her nightmare. Ethan picked up his phone and texted Mia. "It's done. Done coming home." 3 seconds later, his phone buzzed. One short message, just one word. "I'm waiting." Ethan stood up, left money for the coffee on the table, and walked out. When he pushed the door open, sunlight hit his face, warm, and Ethan closed his eyes for a second to feel it. He wouldn't be back. Ethan knew that. Julian was a coward, and cowards don't fight when they know they're being watched. He'd find another target, an easier one. And if he was stupid enough to come back, Ethan had the evidence. He could end him with one tap on his phone. But as he walked toward his car in the sunlight, Julian's last words still echoed in his head. "You'll regret this." Ethan wasn't scared, but he knew this fight wasn't over. It was just starting. Chapter 8, The Truth Comes Out. A week went by. Ethan thought it was over. He'd faced Julian, showed him the evidence, threatened to take him to court. The guy would disappear. That's how bullies like him work. Find an easy target, back off when someone fights back. But Ethan was wrong. Sudden. It started with a text from Sarah, another ceramic artist Mia knew from the arts market. "Have you heard anything about Mia? Someone's saying she used to be..." I don't know if I should believe it. Ethan read that text on Tuesday morning, sitting in his office while Mia was still asleep. His hand holding the phone, and a cold feeling ran down his spine, not cold from the weather, but cold from inside, like someone had dumped ice in his stomach. He didn't text back. He called Sarah directly. "Who did you hear this from?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice calm, but the muscles in his jaw were already tightening. Sarah hesitated. "A friend. She said there's a man. He's been going to galleries, art cafes, saying Mia is a murderer. That she killed someone and went to prison for 10 years. People are talking." Ethan didn't say anything. He felt blood rush to his face, hot, and his ears started ringing. "I don't believe it," Sarah said quickly. "Mia's a good person. I just wanted to ask, to know the truth, so I know how to protect her." "Don't ask Mia," Ethan said, his voice low. "Don't ask her anything. Let me handle it." He hung up and sat in the dark room, his hand still gripping the phone so tight his knuckles cracked. Julian. He wasn't attacking with violence. He was attacking with something worse. Gossip, judgment, the way society looks at someone who made a mistake and decides they don't deserve a second chance. Ethan wanted to run out of the house, find Julian, punch his face until he couldn't talk anymore. But he sat still, his hands on the desk, and he looked at them, shaking hands, fingers curled like claws. He took a deep breath, his lungs expanding, and tried to push the anger down, shove it deep inside where it wouldn't hurt anyone. He couldn't let Mia know, not now. But Mia found out. Another friend, someone who didn't mean any harm, sent her a worried text. Ethan saw it on Mia's phone screen when she left it on the kitchen counter. He watched her pick it up, watched her eyes move across the words, watched her face change. It wasn't shock. Ethan had seen her shocked when she confessed her past. This was different, a collapse. Every line on her face drooped, like someone had cut the invisible strings holding her up. Her shoulders dropped, her arms went limp, and the phone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a dry thud. "You know," Ethan said, "not a question." Mia didn't answer. She sat down on the chair, eyes wide, staring at nothing. Ethan sat next to her, put his hand on hers, and felt her skin cold, her fingers stiff like they were dead. "He's doing it," Ethan said, his voice shaking with anger. Not at her, but at himself, for thinking it would be simple. "He's going around telling people, but don't worry, I'll..." "No," Mia said, her voice so soft Ethan had to lean in to hear. "Don't do anything. He's right." "No, he's not right. I killed someone," Mia said, and her voice suddenly went cold, distant, like she was talking about someone else. "People have a right to know. I can't hide forever." Ethan squeezed her hand. "You're not hiding. You served 10 years. You paid your debt. You deserve to live a new life." Mia turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry, no tears, but there was a pain deeper than any tears. "They'll never see me the same," she said. "Sarah, Lisa, the people at the arts market, they'll look at me and see a murderer." Ethan didn't know what to say. He just held her, feeling her body stiff, unresponsive, like a piece of wood floating down a river. In the days that followed, Mia didn't leave the house. She didn't go to her studio. The clay on her wheel dried out and cracked. The unfinished pots gathered dust. She sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring out the window with empty eyes. Ethan saw texts from Sarah and other friends. Some worried, some curious, some just silent. Ethan answered for Mia. Said she was sick, needed rest. But he knew that was only temporary. One afternoon, Ethan sat at his computer, scrolling through social media. He found a post in a private group for the local arts community. Mia's name wasn't there, but everyone knew who they meant. "I heard a potter around here is a killer. She should be in prison, not selling art." Ethan read that line over and over. His hand gripped the mouse, and he felt anger rise in his chest. Hot, thick, blinding. He wanted to respond, to tell them they didn't know anything, that Mia had paid her debt, that she was the best person he'd ever met. But he didn't, because he knew, no matter what he said, they'd still look at her differently. Legal justice couldn't erase the judgment of other people, and that made Ethan feel more helpless than anything he'd ever experienced. He turned off the computer, stood up, and walked to the living room. Mia was still on the couch, still wrapped in the old blanket, still staring out the window. Ethan sat next to her, and she leaned her head on his shoulder without a word. They sat like that in the dark room as the afternoon light faded and the streetlights came on one by one. Ethan felt Mia's breath, shallow, steady, but not the breath of someone sleeping. It was the breath of someone trying to survive minute by minute, second by second. He wanted to say something comforting, something promising, something that could pull her out of the darkness swallowing her. But he didn't have the words. He could only sit there, be something to lean on, and pray that something, anything, would show up to change things. Ethan's phone rang at 8 o'clock that night. He looked at the screen, unknown number. He was about to ignore it, but his finger stopped. A vague instinct, a feeling that this wasn't a random call. "This is Ethan," he said, his voice rough from exhaustion. "Hello, I'm Mark Henderson, an attorney." The man's voice was deep, steady. "I've been assigned to handle the Julian Moreau case." Ethan sat up straight, cold ran down his spine again, but this time it was different. Not fear, clarity. "Case?" Ethan asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "Julian Moreau was arrested 3 hours ago," the attorney said. "He was charged with extortion of another victim, a woman in a neighboring city. She had evidence and went to the police. He's being held for investigation." Ethan stopped breathing. He wasn't sure he was hearing right. "During the investigation," the attorney continued, "we found evidence that Julian also extorted someone else earlier, a woman named Mia. I understand she's your girlfriend." "Yes," Ethan said, his voice suddenly dry. "That's right." "The police want to talk to her," the attorney said. "As a witness. Her statement will help build the case against Julian. With 2 victims, there's a very good chance he'll serve real prison time." Ethan looked at Mia. She was still on the couch, still wrapped in the blanket, but now she was looking at him. Her eyes were still tired, still hurt, but there was a spark in them. A small, weak spark, but it was there. "She'll come," Ethan said into the phone, his eyes on Mia. "We'll come." He hung up. The room was so quiet Ethan could hear the clock on the wall. Tick-tock. Slow. Mia looked at him, her lips moving. "Who was that?" Ethan put his phone on the table, stood up, and walked to her. He sat down facing her and took her hands. Her hands were still cold, but no longer stiff. "Julian was just arrested," he said, his voice low and steady, but inside his heart was pounding so hard he could hear blood rushing in his ears. "He was extorting someone else. The police want you to be a witness." Mia's eyes went wide. Those eyes, dead for so many days, suddenly came alive. Not joy, not relief, amazement. Like someone waking from a long dream, not sure if they were still dreaming. "He got arrested?" she whispered. "Arrested," Ethan said. And he felt her fingers squeeze his, the first time in days she'd squeezed back. "And you're going to help put him in prison. You can do this, Mia. You're not helpless. You can stand up." Mia looked at Ethan, and in her eyes, tears started to gather. But this time, Ethan knew they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of someone who just saw light at the end of the tunnel. She nodded, a small nod, but steady. "I'll do it," she said, her voice shaking but not breaking. "I'll tell the truth." Ethan held her, and for the first time in a week, her body wasn't stiff. She leaned into him, her breath warming up, her arms around his back, holding his shirt like he was the last life raft in the ocean. They sat like that in the dark room, but this time the darkness didn't feel so heavy. Outside the window, the streetlights were still on, and in the night sky, one star shone through the gray clouds. Ethan didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if the gossip would stop, if the arts community would see Mia differently, if she could go back to her studio and do what she loved. But he knew one thing, Julian would pay, and Mia wouldn't have to face it alone anymore. He held her tighter, feeling her warmth, and in his chest something was lit. Not the fire of anger like before. A small flame. Warm, steady. The flame of hope. Chapter 9, The Truth Revealed. The police station loomed in front of Ethan like a gray block of concrete, small windows glowing with cold fluorescent light. He parked in the lot, turned off the engine, and sat for a few seconds, feeling his heartbeat faster than normal. Next to him, Mia sat straight, hands on her lap, fingers intertwined. She wasn't shaking. Ethan looked at her and noticed it right away. No shaking, no curling up, no hanging head. She sat there, eyes facing the station's main entrance, her breathing steady, deep, slow. "Do you want to wait a little longer?" Ethan asked gently. Mia shook her head. She turned to him, and in those green eyes, Ethan saw a steadiness he'd never seen in her before. Not the steadiness of someone who isn't afraid, but someone who's been afraid too long and decided it was time to stop. "I'm ready," she said. They walked into the station, and Ethan felt the change in the air. Smell of cleaner, slow printer sounds, quick glances from officers working. He took Mia's hand, and she squeezed back. A tight, warm squeeze, not of someone looking for protection, but of someone saying she could do this. They were led to a small room. Table, chairs, a recorder, and a woman in uniform sitting across from them. Detective Rodriguez, according to her nameplate. She had short brown hair, sharp eyes, and a small smile when she looked at Mia. "Mia," she said, her voice warm, "thank you for coming." Ethan sat in a chair against the wall a few steps away from Mia. He wasn't part of the interview, he was just there waiting. But he saw everything. He saw how Mia sat straight, how she put her hands on the table, how she looked right into the detective's eyes as the questions began. Mia's voice filled the small room, clear, steady. She talked about the first phone calls, the envelope of cash, the meetings with Julian at the cafe. She talked about the threats, the fear, the sleepless nights on the balcony. She talked about the first $2,000, the demand for $5,000 more, the $20,000 Julian asked for at their last meeting. Ethan sat still back against the wall, listening. He'd heard this story before. He'd heard it the night Mia confessed, through choked sobs and shaking shoulders. But this time was different. This time, no tears. This time, Mia's voice didn't shake. She spoke like someone who'd been through the storm and was now standing in the calm, looking back with clear eyes. Ethan looked at her, and in his chest something rose, not love, not pity, but admiration. Deep admiration that made his throat tighten. She carried this alone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks she was scared, crying alone, staying up on the balcony. And now she's sitting here, facing a detective, telling it all without fear. Detective Rodriguez nodded, took notes, asked more questions. Mia answered them all without hesitation. When it was over, the detective stood up and shook Mia's hand. "You did very well," she said. "Your statement will help a lot. Julian Moreau will be held for trial. With the evidence we have, he won't get bail." Ethan felt relief run down his spine, not loud relief, but a quiet wave slowly spreading through his body, letting the muscles in his shoulders relax, letting his breath go deeper. They walked out of the room and down the hallway. Mia was ahead, Ethan behind. He watched her back. Her thin figure, small shoulders, long brown hair falling down her back. The back of a woman who just did something not everyone could do. Face her biggest fear and overcome it. Ethan's phone rang as they left the station. He looked at the screen. Another unknown number, but this time he didn't hesitate. "This is Ethan." "Hello, I'm Sarah Mitchell, an attorney." The woman's voice was young, quick. "I just read about the Julian Moreau case in the news. I'd like to offer help to your girlfriend, Mia." Ethan stopped walking. He stood still on the sidewalk, and Mia stopped too, turning to look at him with a questioning look. "What kind of help?" Ethan asked. "I specialize in record expungement," the attorney said. "I've reviewed her file. The incident happened when she was a minor. She served her full sentence. And since her release, she has no further legal issues. She qualifies to have her record sealed. I'll do this for free." Ethan stood still, phone in hand, feeling something else rising inside him. Something warm, full, like sunlight after a long rain. Thank you," he said. And he realized his voice was shaking, not from worry, but from something else. "You're welcome," the attorney said. "Everyone deserves a second chance. I'll send details by email. Have a good day." Ethan hung up and turned to Mia. She was looking at him with wide eyes, curious. "Who was that?" she asked. "A lawyer," Ethan said, and he felt a smile forming on his face. The first smile in many days. "She says you qualify to have your record sealed. She'll help you do it, for free." Mia stood still, her eyes opened wider, and Ethan saw tears gathering at the corners. But this time, he knew they were tears of relief, of hope, of someone seeing a door open after 10 years trapped in the past. She didn't cry, she just stood there, lips pressed tight, shoulders shaking slightly. looking at Ethan with eyes that couldn't speak.
Ah.
They left the station grounds and walked to the sidewalk where the afternoon sun was golden. The maple trees along the street were starting to change color, yellow leaves scattered on the pavement. Ethan felt the sun's warmth on his skin, a gentle warmth, not rushed. Mia walked beside him, her steps light, no longer heavy like before. She didn't say anything, and neither did Ethan. They just walked together, like both needed time to let what happened sink in. When they reached the car, Ethan stopped. Mia stopped too. He turned to look at her. The afternoon sun hit her face, lighting up her features, her eyes still slightly swollen, her lips starting to pink again, her brown hair glowing in the gold light. She was beautiful. More beautiful than any day Ethan had ever seen. Not because of the sunlight. Because she was standing straight. Because her shoulders weren't drooping. Because in her eyes, the light that had gone out so long ago, the light of life, of hope, had come back. Ethan took her hand. Her hand was warm, fingers soft, no longer cold and stiff like the days she sat on the couch staring out the window. He looked straight into her eyes, and for the first time, he didn't hide anything. Not his shame, not his regret, not what he'd done. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low but not weak, "for everything." Mia looked at him, silent. "I'm sorry I doubted you," Ethan said, and he felt each word coming out heavy, but he couldn't hold them back. "When you stayed up at night, when you cried alone on the balcony, when the phone rang and you got scared, I didn't come to you and ask if you were okay. I sat in the living room and Googled signs of cheating." He paused, took a deep breath. His lungs expanded and he felt his chest rise and fall. "I'm sorry I tracked you," he said, and his voice started shaking. "I put a tracker on your car. I drove to the cafe and took pictures of you while you were crying. I thought the worst things about you, Mia." He held her hand tighter, like if he let go, she'd disappear. "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time his voice cracked. "Can you forgive me?" Silence. Ethan looked at Mia, and in her eyes, he saw tears rolling down her cheeks. But she wasn't sobbing. She just stood there, tears falling, lips trembling. Then she stepped forward. She didn't say anything. She just stepped forward, put her arms around his neck, and pressed her face against his chest. Ethan felt her warmth, the jasmine smell of her hair, her tears soaking through his shirt, hot on his skin. She held him tight, and he held her tight. They stood like that on the sidewalk in the afternoon sun, under the maple trees changing colors. People passing by might look at them, might think they were just a normal couple hugging in the evening light. They didn't know that this hug was the end of a nightmare. They didn't know behind this hug were sleepless nights, envelopes of cash, threatening phone calls, and a man who lost his faith but found it again. Mia looked up, eyes red, but the corners of her mouth were starting to lift. A small smile, weak but real. "I forgive you," she whispered, her voice rough. "But you have to promise me one thing." "What?" Ethan asked. His voice just as rough. "Next time you're worried," she said, "ask me. Don't Google it." Ethan laughed, a short, choked laugh, but a real laugh. He held her again and felt her laugh too. Small vibrations passing from her to him. "I promise," he said. They stood there in each other's arms as the afternoon light faded, replaced by streetlights turning on. Above them, gray clouds drifted away, leaving a clear sky, wide and blue. Ethan didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if Mia's record would be sealed, if her friends would look at her differently, if the gossip would fade or not. But he knew one thing, with certainty that warmed his heart. She forgave him. She was still here, in his arms, and they'd face whatever came next together. That was all he needed. Hush! Chapter 10, A New Beginning. 1 year later. The small gallery on the Arts District street was filled with golden light from big windows. Ethan stood in the corner, holding a glass of wine, watching Mia from across the room. She was talking to a group of visitors, holding a small ceramic vase, her smile bright. She wore a light blue dress, her brown hair loose on her shoulders, and there was something different about her face. Confidence, peace, the light of someone who found her place after the storm. Today's exhibit was small. About 30 people, mostly friends from the arts community, a few neighbors, some gallery guests. But for Mia, it was a milestone. The first time she stood in front of people as Mia the artist, not the woman with a past, not the victim, not the one who made a mistake. Just Mia, the potter. Ethan walked along the walls, looking at each piece. Every vase, every cup, every small sculpture had its own story. There were vases with cracked glaze, the cracks deliberately made, then repaired with shimmering gold lines. There were cups fired from rough clay, surfaces bumpy like tree bark, but smooth and soft on the inside. And there was a small sculpture, a woman standing straight, arms wide, face lifted to the sky, like she was receiving something after a long rain. Next to each piece was a small card with the title and a short description. Ethan read each one, and in his chest, warm feeling rose. Mended crack, the vase with gold lines on white glaze. After the rain, the sculpture of the woman with arms open. And the first time, a small cup, pale blue glaze, so simple it had almost no decoration. But Ethan knew it was the first cup Mia made after she went back to her studio after the days she wouldn't leave the couch. He stopped in front of one final piece, a large plate with two hands clasped together on it. Copper glaze, warm, the lines so fine Ethan could see each finger's crease. The title, Forgiveness. Ethan looked at the plate and felt a light touch on his arm. He turned, and Mia was standing next to him, her eyes bright under the gallery lights. "Do you like it?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her, then back at the plate. "I love it," he said. "It's beautiful in a way that's just yours." Mia smiled. Her smile now wasn't shy or forced like the early days. It was the smile of someone who'd found peace within herself. Throughout the evening, Ethan stood by Mia, introducing her to visitors. He didn't treat her past like a secret anymore. When a friend asked about the cracks in the vase, Ethan said, "She's saying that wounds don't have to be hidden. Sometimes, when mended with patience and love, they become more beautiful than before." Mia looked at him, surprise in her eyes. She didn't know he understood her work so deeply. Sarah, the friend who'd asked Ethan about the rumors, came to Mia and hugged her tight. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice choked. "You did it." Mia hugged her back, and Ethan saw her shoulders shake slightly, not from sadness, but from emotion. She'd lost some friends over the past year, people who couldn't see her the same way. But the ones who stayed, the ones who really mattered, they stayed and loved her just as much as before. When the last visitors left, the gallery went quiet. The golden lights were still on, and the ceramic pieces glowed quietly on white shelves. Mia stood in the middle of the room, holding an empty wine glass, looking around with a content smile. Ethan came to her, put his hand on her shoulder. "You did great," he said. Mia turned to him, and he saw a different light in her eyes. Not the light of success, but the light of peace, of someone who'd been through the storm and realized she was still whole. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft as breath, "for staying, for not leaving." Ethan didn't say anything. He just held her hand, and they stood like that in the empty room, surrounded by pieces that told stories of wounds and healing. They went home when the city lights were on. The small apartment welcomed them with familiar warmth, the smell of clay from the studio, wind from the balcony, photos on the walls of moments from the past year. Ethan made 2 cups of tea, and they sat on the balcony, where a year ago Mia had sat alone in the dark, crying silently while Ethan slept inside. Now the balcony was lit with small LED lights Mia had hung around the railing. The jasmine plant in the pot had started blooming, sweet scent floating in the cool night air. In the sky, gray clouds were drifting away, leaving clear space with stars shining. Ethan sat down holding his tea, feeling the warmth of the ceramic in his palm. He looked out at the city below, orange and yellow lights stretching to the horizon, cars moving like little glowing dots. And far away, tall buildings rising into the night. Mia sat next to him, leaning her head on his shoulder. He felt the warmth of her hair, the familiar jasmine scent, her steady breathing. Ethan put his tea down and took out his phone. He opened the screen, and his finger went to the tracking app, the app he hadn't opened in a year, but had never deleted. He looked at the screen, and memories came flooding back. The night he sat at his computer searching for signs of cheating. The morning the small gray box arrived. The night he crouched under Mia's car, attaching the tracker to cold metal. He remembered the shaking when he watched the blue dot on the map, the anger when he saw Mia at the cafe instead of the craft store, the shame when he learned the truth. Mia looked up at him, saw him holding the phone, saw the numbers and map on the screen. She didn't say anything. just watched. Ethan held the phone out so she could see. "You know what this is?" he asked. Mia looked, and Ethan saw her recognize it right away. Her eyes opened a little wider, but not in anger or hurt. Understanding, acceptance. Because she already knew everything and she'd already forgiven. "Tracking app," she said softly. "The one you used to follow me." Ethan nodded. He didn't look away. He'd done that enough. "I never deleted it," he said. "A whole year it's been here. A reminder of what I did, of who I was." He paused, took a deep breath. The cool night air filled his lungs, and he felt peace in each breath. "But I don't need it anymore," he said, and his finger pressed the app icon, held it until it started shaking. An X appeared in the corner. Ethan looked at Mia, and the corner of his mouth lifted into a smile. A gentle smile. No regret, no shame, just release. "Don't need this anymore," he said, "because I know you'll always come back." He pressed the X. The app disappeared from the screen. Mia looked at the phone, then at Ethan. Her eyes lit up, and Ethan saw light tears in her lashes. But this time, he knew they were tears of happiness, of wholeness. "I'll always come back," she whispered. "I promise." Ethan put the phone down, put his arm around her, and pulled her close. She leaned her head against his chest, and he felt her warm, steady breath, gentle like waves on land. They sat like that in silence, looking where the sunset had faded long ago, watching the city lights shine below. The night sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet, and far away on the horizon a pale pink light began to show, a sign of a new day coming. Ethan looked toward it, and in his heart, peace filled him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if the wounds of the past would ever fully heal, if the gossip would completely stop, if Mia would ever forget her years in prison and the 3 weeks of fear. But he knew one thing with certainty that warmed his heart. They made it through. They chose to stay together, and they'd keep going. No more secrets, no more doubts, no more tracking apps or Google searches. Just them. And a love that was tested, wounded, but in the end stood strong. Mia shifted in his arms, and he felt her smile. Without looking, he knew. "I love you," she whispered, soft as wind. Ethan bent down, kissed her hair, and whispered back, "I love you too, and I'm never going to be afraid of that again." Far away on the horizon, pale pink light slowly spread, signaling a new day coming. The stars began to fade, and the sky turned from black to deep blue, to pale purple, to warm orange. They sat there in each other's arms, waiting for the sunrise. No fear, no doubt. Just two people and a new beginning.